Hello and welcome to the overview for the course paper for Ancient and Medieval Philosophy. So there's one paper they have to do for the class, but you get to pick between three options and only have to pick one and just do one paper. So the first option is the Meno, Plato's argument about his Doctrine of Recollection, and this is a summary and argument style paper. The second option is on Aristotle's Moral Education, which is also a summary and argument style paper. And the third option is a case paper. This is an argument and objection reply paper, and I do provide some sample cases, but you can create your own case, provided it's relevant to ancient and medieval philosophy. And once again, there are three options, and you only have to pick one of these. So regardless of which option you pick, there are the following turning it in mechanics. So there's a draft you can do. There's the draft due date, which is when you perhaps should do the draft by. It's submitted through Canvas, of course, and you can do as many drafts as you wish. You can turn them in before the due date, and you can do multiple drafts, and you can wish to do 0 drafts. Drafts are scored and commented on, but not graded. And what this means is I put a number on there, which would be the number that the paper would get if it was graded, but it's a score, not a grade, because the draft does not count towards or against your final grade. There's also a draft available until date, same assignment, but this is the last chance to turn in a draft, and the reason for that is a very practical one, which is I need time to read a draft and comment on it, and you would need time to revise the draft. And so the deadline for the draft will be before the deadline for the paper. There's also a plagiarism checker you can use to check to see if the paper is flagged as plagiarism, and also it will attempt to guess whether it's AI or not. And I recommend using that to avoid potentially unpleasant mistakes. Now, for turning the paper in, there are 3 deadlines, and this may seem sort of needlessly complicated, but there are good reasons. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So for the on-time deadline, which is like the true deadline when the paper should be turned in, this takes care of the question, is there extra credit in the class? And the answer is yes. Lots, in fact. One of these is the +5 bonus deadline, which is kind of traditional extra credit. Basically, crudely put, getting points for doing, stuff. Extra points. And so what this does is, if you want to get that +5 on the paper, just be sure to turn in the paper by this deadline. This is turned in through Canvas, of course, and it's got to be a readable Word or PDF file, because if I can't read it, I can't grade it. Obviously, in this time of digital stuff, I don't accept printed papers or email copies. Everything should go through Canvas for the reason of that's where I comment on it, that's where I grade it, keeps a record of it, etc. In these days, there's really no reason to do printed papers, or definitely not emailed papers. If you turn the paper in by this date, +5 points added on. Since it is extra credit, there's no extensions allowed. Either you do it or you don't. Now, what if something goes wrong and you can't turn it in by the extra credit deadline? Well, the second deadline is the emergency deadline, and this was created to handle situations where there's a need to do the paper for it to be a bit late, but it's not like super serious. It's not like taking incredible amounts of time, whatever is causing this. The usual things like a person gets like a cold for a while and just doesn't feel like writing the paper, or other stuff comes up, etc. So big things. This is full credit, 100% credit. Not like 100% score, but full credit. And you don't require any documentation or permission, to ask to do it. You just turn it into the standard deadline. And provided it's in by then, you would get the full credit. Now, what happens if something serious happens? For example, what if somebody gets called up for National Guard duty, or someone is badly injured and they're unable to write? As an example, some years back, a wall fell on a student, and they came to class like in a full cast of both their arms. They obviously couldn't write, and it took them out of writing for quite a while. And so, of course, in that case, extensions are fine. But an extension has to be for something, serious. unavoidable by reasonable means. Again, things like being called up for National Guard service and being deployed, able to write, major injuries, major illness. But let me know. I'm happy to work with people. This, of course, turned in the same way through the Canvas assignment. Got to be readable. Now, the third deadline is the 50% deadline. And this is, I usually put this at the last day of finals, typically 11:59 p.m., but always check. I mean, I've never changed this before, but I don't want to promise something because I plan to leave this video up for, until I need to change it. And so to always check. So this deadline arose because of a situation where a student, came to me and said, essentially, I kind of forgot about the paper, but I'm a graduating senior. What can I do? And this is, way, 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 way late. And so I came up with the 50% deadline, which is a chance when a person has, again, no actual excuse, no actual reason, why they didn't do the paper beyond not doing it. And this is a chance to finish up the class. And the most common reason I get is typically someone says they forgot they had a paper to do in the class. And if someone has had serious illness, called up for National Guard duty, serious injury, etc., then they would qualify for full credit extension. But if there's no excuse, but a person still wants to do the paper, turn it in, which is a good idea because 50% is better than 0%. This is the deadline to use. If the paper is not done by then, obviously 0. As always, it goes into Canvas as through an assignment as a readable file, Word or PDF. Now, when turning in your paper, obviously you got to be format I can read. So stick with Word or PDF. If you're using a Mac, using their word processor or some unusual word processor, save it as PDF or Word if it can, because that way you can read it. You only have to turn the paper in once, even though there are three deadlines provided. There's only one paper grade. Now, this does create a bit of confusion or panic sometimes because when the +5 deadline passes, sometimes people don't do that. And then I'll get a panicked email saying, I got a 0 on the +5 deadline, but I didn't do the paper. And I'll reply back reasonably, oh, yes, that's working as intended. Because if you don't turn a paper with the +5 deadline and it passes, then nothing's there. It's a 0. And then I, of course, reassure the student that this doesn't mean that they failed the paper, because it's still the emergency deadline and, if necessary, the 50% deadline. So if someone doesn't do the +5 deadline paper, but they turn in a paper for the emergency deadline or the 50% deadline, that will be the paper grade. So if you go to the gradebook on Canvas, there's a category for paper. That's your paper grade. And then there's 3 assignments under that, the +5, emergency, and 50%. And the best score out of those 3 count, which means you only have to do the paper once and only turn it in once. It's set up to keep the best, one of the 3. And the typical scenario is a person does a paper, turns it in once, and that's that. What happens if a person turns in the paper multiple times, 3 times? Well, they would get the best score out of those 3 for whatever reason that might occur. So again, only have to pick one paper option of the 3, and you'll have to turn the paper in once. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.